let's face it, friends, we're all walking around wrapped in a thick cocoon of dreams. And the one thing that has made society work, I mean, man, because we're basically a carnivore. And, man originally started out as a cannibal. And I think he's just decided along the way not to, be too outward about it. He doesn't, and that's what's called society. See, coming to an agreement that we will lay off eating each other in public. I mean, with the French fries on the side and a little tomato sauce over the kneecaps and that kind of stuff. Well, now wait a minute, man. I mean, that's true. This is not the Lawrence Welk Good Time Hour here, and I ain't Glenn Campbell. I'm going to say more about life, but that's what society really is. See, it's a decision that I will protect your cocoon if you will protect mine. That really is the essence of civilized life. Now, the barbarian, he doesn't do this. The true barbarian just reaches down, picks up his iron mace, and claps you one behind the ear. This is the ultimate truth, you see. So he figures life would be better without you on the horizon. So, bam, that's all there is to it. Now, that's the difference really between the barbarian world and the civilized world. But then, of course, being part of man's society, you walk around, you read novels, and you go to movies. And have you noticed that almost all the movies that man turns out these days is about man? I mean, there's movies about war, there's movies about sex and love and all this jazz. But rarely does man face, in any of the movies, his true adversary. It ain't his fellow man. What is our true adversary? Our adversary, really. What is our true enemy? Is walking around human beings. What's the true enemy of all living creatures? No, because to some people it's probably rats. But I would like to point out that the rat, too, suffers from this same problem. I'll tell you what it is. It's, well, for want of a better word, I hate to use such a tame word because it's such a good word. I'd have to say nature itself. I mean, the real thing. Now, wait a minute now. We've just had floods all over the place. Thousands of people died in the floods, right? Okay. Nobody says anything about what caused the floods. It's not somebody lousing up. It's nature. That's what it really ultimately is. There is no subject outside of possibly politics that is discussed more continually in New York City than the weather, in spite of the fact that weather is non-existent in New York. We do not have any weather like people have out there. We don't have any weather. I mean, we haven't had a decent snow in 3 or 4 years, right? It never really gets hot. You think it gets hot in New York? If you think it gets hot in New York, friends, you've never been in places where it gets hot. I mean hot. I mean, I've been in places where the temperature's 130 degrees every day. New York, I think they'd pass out if it gets over 95. They walk around, and Lyle Fan comes on the news. Oh, today, who's that? No. There's no weather in New York. We don't. How long has it been since a tidal wave has moved up 7th Avenue? I mean, a 37-foot tidal wave bearing with it all the ladies from the bargain basement at Macy's, screaming and yelling and waving their shopping bags. I mean, now that would be weather. That would be what. How long has it been since the Pan Am building has been raked by a first-class tornado that just worked up one side of it and worked down the other side of it, pulled all the windows out, and spit them over towards the Empire State Building, along with 12,000 desks, 1,900 computers, and 422 girls from the steno pool? Now that's weather. I mean, that's really weather, and that's what people live in out there, out there. So when you talk about weather, weather is nature. Now here in this area, in the eastern seaboard, you got this great ocean out here. And the ocean is a tempering thing.
which means that the winter doesn't get very cold here in New York, even though guys yell a lot about it. It doesn't, forget it. Believe me, you don't even really need an overcoat in New York. And it doesn't get really very hot here, even though you think it does. I can only say to you that if you think it gets hot in New York, friend, you have never been where it gets hot. But out in the Great Plains, it gets both of them. Man, all the way. And so, late in August, when the sun is sitting there and it's about 4 million miles across and there's a kind of a brassy quality to the air, and the steel mills off in the distance have been belching blast furnace dust up into that atmosphere day and night. It sort of hangs low. The air has a curious kind of an orange, red, gray, greenish cast. And the sun hangs at a peculiar angle in August. And at night, when the moon comes up, that's something to see, man, in August, late in August and early September, because the moon gets unbelievably enormous because of the curious invection currents, the feeling in the air itself. It's caused by light bending. That's what it's caused by. And the light is bent because of the heavy atmosphere that's hung low because of this heat laying down on the ground. And this, sometimes, it's hard to believe it. I have actually seen the moon in hot, late August and early September days in Indiana literally stretch almost from one end of the horizon to the other. Now, it sounds like I'm exaggerating. I am not. It's a strange, shimmery, and it only lasts for a few seconds, that image. Maybe a minute or two. But when the moon gets in a certain place and all the light is bent right, the atmosphere itself acts as a fantastic, unimaginably huge telescope. And this moon is suddenly a great orange, curious kind of disk. It's very strangely misshapen. And it's not particularly beautiful. It's a little scary, actually. And it's dark orange. It's called a blood moon. Have you ever heard the term blood moon? It's called a blood moon. It's a red color. Sort of gray, smoky, drifting wisps that go drifting over it. It just hangs there. And it's hot. Oh, my God, is it hot. I mean, it is so hot that you just sit. No matter what you do, the water just pours off you. Just drips. The humidity stands maybe at, 140, 150%. Oh, yeah, you can just reach out and grab a chunk of air and just sort of wring it out, and stuff drips out of it, You just sit there. And then there are mosquitoes. The mosquitoes start moving out of the big swamps, out of the shores of the lake. We're talking about Lake Michigan here. They start moving out of the reeds roughly the end of July, and they become epidemic around the middle of August. And you see these great black swarms. It looks like drifting puffs of dust and smoke. You can actually see them outlined against the moon, great drifting clouds of mosquitoes. And you can hear them. You can hear a long, low, distant hum all the time. It's mosquitoes. And bats. Yeah, the bats come out. And you can see these bats around 8, 9 o'clock flitting around the streetlights. You just see little black bats. Off he goes. He is eating right off the top of the hog because they love it when the mosquitoes are out. And by the way, that's one of man's very few total defenses against the mosquito, are the bats. So if you don't like bats, man, in many states they're protected because a bat will just fly through a swarm of mosquitoes, man, with his mouth wide open, sucking. And he'll just suck them in. And he'll eat millions of them in a day. So you see the bats, you see the drifting mosquitoes, you see the moon hanging low. It's hot. Once in a while a car goes by, and you can smell the heat from the car itself, the paint and the bad upholstery. It just lays there. Well, it was on a Saturday, just like that. Temperature, maybe 95, and I'm not exaggerating, 95 to 100. Humidity, exactly the same. Mosquitoes moving out. Big moon just about to come up. Schwartz comes driving by on his bike. Says, me and Flick and Bruner are going to a picnic. I says, a picnic? What do you mean a picnic? At night? I said, yep. They say there's a picnic down at the Forest Preserve. Let's go. So I get my bike out of the garage, an Elgin, in case you're curious. And I get out on the road behind Schwartz and Flick and Bruner, and we start pedaling off into that fantastic moon. Through this, enormous swirling clouds of mosquitoes, dripping sweat behind us as we went, heading to the forest preserve. It's the first time I ever went to a picnic that was at night. Actually began at night. Well, we arrived at the forest preserve, and there was just a great big banner across the front. And it had a symbol on it. No letters at all. And we drifted down the gravel road. Down the gravel road we drifted. I said to Schwartz, "What the heck is that, Schwartz?" Schwartz, "It's the picnic." And Flick says, "Yeah, come on, let's go." See, Flick was the dill dog of the crowd. He was always ready to go, you know. If the tarantulas were having a picnic, he'd be there, you know. He didn't care. And Bruner says, "Oh, I'm scared." I said, "What is it?" Schwartz says, "It's the Ku Klux Klan." We were at the yearly picnic of the Ku Klux Klan. The KKK. And finally Schwartz says, "Let's get out of here." Flick says, "Oh, come on, they don't care." Schwartz says, "No, come on, let's go. We're going to get in trouble. I don't like this." And Bruner's already crying. He's not saying nothing. And some guy started to look around with a flashlight, one of these guys with the long, high cape. We got on our bikes, and we pedaled like Billy be damned. Over the gravel road, through the long, winding forest, under the great orange moon. Oh, and one thing. The light. How they lit the scene. They had a huge cross that was burning. Actually, a burning cross. Have you ever seen a burning cross? You haven't? You've heard of it. Listen, hearing of it ain't the same as seeing it. That's like hearing about King Kong. Ain't the same. And so we're riding back on our bikes in absolute silence. Somehow that whole picnic scene had changed. I had no idea what the Ku Klux Klan was. I just, I heard the name, that's all. Just like most of you. I just heard it. And I came home about 10 o'clock. Went up the steps. The old man sitting in the front room in his underwear, drinking some beer, which is what he always did when he was sitting around in his underwear in the middle of August. You could hear him sucking that beer can for blocks. All of a sudden, I don't know how, I never, I'm a grown-up now, and I can't do it. But when I was a kid, grown-ups had a peculiar thing like this. My mother suddenly turns and says, "What's the matter?" I said, "Nothing, nothing." She says, "What's the matter?" "I won't tell your father." I said, "Ma, what's a Ku Klux Klan?" Clank. She dropped the fork she was drying. She said, "What was that?" I said, "What's the Ku Klux Klan, Ma?" She said, "Where did you hear that?" I said, "Oh, I just heard it." She said, "You stay away from that. Don't you ever have anything to do with those people." I said, "Why?" She just don't. And I have never had reason to doubt her. We've never mentioned it since. To this day, she doesn't know that I sat in on a Ku Klux Klan picnic.
That the East has got an ocean. It's got a pretty big chunk of water out there, and that makes things muted in the East. In other words, winter sneaks on gradually in the East. Summer comes on gradually. As you probably, you can't tell anybody in New York, spring has been sneaking up for about 5 months here in New York. That also means that winter has been disappearing for about 5 months gradually. It's not like that in the Midwest. In the Midwest, there is no such thing as a giant body. About the biggest body of water, of course, is Lake Michigan. That's nothing compared to the ocean. And the temperature will drop 40 degrees in one afternoon, like in an hour. The weird thing, you're standing out on a ball field, the temperature is 85 degrees, and you're sweating. Maybe it's 90, and the water, the sweat is trickling down your back and rolling down your backbone and gathering down around your belt. You're in the outfield there. And just like that, instantly, it's like somebody has opened. Have you ever walked into a store, into the meat refrigeration department? It's kind of warm in the store. And they open the door and this cold breath comes out at you. Well, that's the kind of wind that suddenly hits without any warning. It just goes, the wind comes out of the Arctic, or wherever the heck the wind comes from, comes down along that long flue of the lake, and you're out there in the outfield. You're sweating. It's 90 degrees. And the wind hits you just on the side of the face. One side of you is now 55 degrees. The other side is 90. Because the wind has not yet reached your left side. It's coming from your right. And it is that quick. By the time you walk from center field to second base, the temperature can actually drop 30 degrees. And I've seen it happen. Now, what this does, produces some wild effects. This is why you're constantly hearing about tornadoes out there in the Midwest. Because this juxtaposition of cold air and hot air produces this wild thing. We used to stand, I remember one afternoon standing in center field. And this is a ballpark, not a field, not a cornfield, anything like that, a real ballpark, see, with the screen all around it, the stands and so on. And I'm out in center field. We were having a practice one day, the ball team I was playing on. And they're throwing the ball around, a bunch of pitchers are warming up over here, and guys are hitting fungo fly balls out in the outfield. We're chasing flies and throwing the ball in. When all of a sudden, just like that, this breath of cold air just came moving across the field, and you could almost see it happen. Instantaneously, there was the wind swirls, makes a swirl like, you've seen those little whirlpools, like that, and it rose up in the air from first base. Now, the wind came from left field moving towards right field. It moved over towards first base. Instantly in the first base coaching box, just went, this corkscrew went up in the air, and you could see papers and things go straight up, maybe 75, 100, 200 feet in the air, just instantly like that. This thing started to move. It gathered speed. While we're watching, it went, moved along the baselines. It moved from first to second, sucking up the infield as it went. It literally sucked up the infield. The clay, the mud. It wasn't mud. It was just dust, clay. It was a hot summer day. Sucked up the infield, and as we watched, in the space of about, maybe 20 seconds, that thing stopped being an invisible circular corkscrew of wind with a few papers swirling and became bright yellow because of the infield. It was sucking the infield right up, just it moved over second base, and the bag disappeared. It had a bag, the bag that was tacked on. The bag, whoop, up went the bag, and you could hear people hollering. You'd hear all the guys, the ball players are running. You'd hear this hollering, hey, oh, wow, like that. It then moved back. It doubled back over the pitcher's mound, sucked up about 4,000 pounds more of dirt, went over the backstop, knocked it flat. All of this happened just knocked the backstop flat, knocked one end of the stands flat, moved over into the infield, into the parking lot, sucked up 14,000 pounds of cinders, and then proceeded to break about 5 windshields of cars. But just broke these windshields. Oh, bang, crash. A hood flew off, and then it disappeared. It's all gone. And the dust started to float down. You could see the dust and a little piece of paper. And we never did find second base, by the way. I don't know where the second base is probably in orbit somewhere. That if any of these astronauts see a second base flying past them somewhere 150 miles out in space, I know where it came from. It just completely disappeared. Our second base, which we had bought, are you aware that people pay for second base and first base? Somebody buys it. Well, our ball team had bought We owned the bases. Our second base was gone, and the windshields were just shattered. A row of cars, about 5 cars, no windshields. One of them lost the hood. And silence. Just like that. And the temperature, 85 again. Went slowly up to about 87. And that one little pocket of cold air had passed by and moved off into the distance. Just like that. But, however, I was witness to a phenomenon that very few people have ever seen. As a result of one of these strange little puffs of cold air. I saw something. And in about 18, speaking of strange phenomena, this is WOR AM and FM New York. You have the little Miller beer whoopee in there. Now, getting back to this phenomenon of the tornado. You know, very few people have ever seen a tornado. I have been, I don't know whether it's privileged or cursed to have been present on 3 separate occasions. Now, what I saw there, what I just described, was really not a tornado. It was an embryonic tornado that was aborted. That is a tornado that started out, but that did not follow through. In short, a tornado can be... You've probably seen a little whirlwind once in a while when you go to a ballpark. This is really, in some way, this is kind of a spawn tornado, but not a real one. Many tornadoes, which people see at the ballpark, they'll see a little spinning wind. This really comes from air currents that have gathered in the stands and have formed a circular motion, and that produces this little whirlwind. That's a whirlwind, but a tornado is a different scene. A tornado comes from a clash of 2 types of air hitting together. It doesn't come from wind blowing under the second deck at Yankee Stadium. And that's why a tornado can be formed, and is most often formed, on, say, a level flat prairie in Kansas, where there is not a grandstand in 1,000 miles. When suddenly out of this wheat field will come this monster. And I'll tell you, if you've ever seen a tornado, you will never forget it. It is one of the things which I think is one of the most awesome, wild, scary sights in all of nature. And I have happened to have seen 3 of them, and was once caught in one. A tornado one time passed by not more than, I would say, 100, maybe 200, maybe 150 feet from where I was, and it just came out of the blue like the proverbial bat out of hell, and just tore the roof off of a building I was standing next to. It tore down 3 high-tension poles right in a line in the middle of the steel mill where I was that day. Picked up a Ford that just turned it right over. I saw a transformer come down from the top of a high-tension line, land on the top of a station wagon and go right through the body. And all the high-tension, the 30,000-volt lines came down with explosions and noises. Don't tell me about tornadoes. I saw this. It pulled... crazy. You know, the funny things about tornadoes, I don't know whether this is boring you or not, but some of the funny things about tornadoes is it's almost impossible to exaggerate the odd things that they will do. You've always heard about the straw that is driven through the 8-foot solid oak, that kind of thing. But they will do odd things. They're selective. For example, I had a bag on me, a big leather bag. I was working as a mail boy in the steel mill. And I had a big leather bag, you know, a mailman's bag, big bag on the side, and I had this mail. And I had a flap over the top of it. And suddenly this wind hit. Now, I didn't get blown by the wind, actually. I did not feel any wind. I heard this tremendous noise, this just unbelievably overwhelming noise. It's like a 10,000 freight trains are running right over you. You can't believe it. It breaks your eardrums. And many men have had their eardrums broken by pressures of one kind or another, by being near a tornado. Well, this thing went, wow, and she went past. And it sort of hummed, too. There's a thrumming sound. You go, it has a mechanical quality. It doesn't sound like anything in nature. Nature, you know, when you hear a sound of nature, there is a ragged unpredictability about it. So the sound of wind blowing goes. Wind varies almost without any predictability. But a tornado has a predictable sound like a freight train. A machine, it goes. You can almost take the frequency of it and measure it. I imagine you could put it on a scope. And you could see the waveform of the sound this thing is making. And it's a regular, almost a sine wave with a few odd, distorted cycles thrown in it. That thing sounds like a giant generator. That's really what it sounds like. Not like a freight train, but like an enormous generator. And it stops abruptly. And then, of course, the sound that takes over is the sound of everything being busted up. Roofs flying off, people screaming, cars being uprooted, trees going down, the river being sucked up. But what this one did, it took the mail right out of my mail sack. Now, how it did it, I don't know. My mail sack was empty, and it was packed full of this mail. Company mail just was gone. I didn't even see it fly. Just whoop. It was that fast. And I lost all the mail. As far as I know, none of it was ever found. It just disappeared. That's it. And this is I suppose the eerie part of it was that this happened about, I would say about 3 or 4 city blocks from where the main office was that I had come out of. I worked out of the main office where the mailroom was. They knew nothing about it. About 3 blocks away. It would be as if almost as if you were in Midtown and suddenly an atom bomb hit in the middle of town, and you were about 2 blocks away and you didn't know anything about it. And everybody came staggering in, with their clothes ripped off and all. They says, wow, the bomb hit. He said, what bomb? What are you talking about? They thought I was the first one. I rushed into this office, and the place was just torn up. I was a kid, I was scared of my mail. Oh, wow. My mail's gone. And I called up the office, and I says, a tornado just hit, and the mail's gone. And they said, are you out of your mind? What are you talking about? I says, a tornado just hit the number 1 plant. And all my mail is gone. The guy says, all right, kid, now come on, cut out the funny business. What do you want? And there I was. But the tornado had knocked down about 2/3 of the steel mill, and it had gone its way, and nobody knew at that moment that it had happened. Well, now, one other thing happened to me. I'm a kid, see.
And the first flake of snow, and the entire school system of Long Island quits and goes home and watches television, which is what it always wanted to do anyway. Why don't you admit it? You're not interested in education out there, Long Island, for crying out loud. You're interested in swinging, making martinis and all that stuff. I know all about Long Island. Staten Island, it's even worse. Terrible, terrible. Well, let me tell you, though, about one night. I remember vividly one particular night. But then when the lake cools off, it cools off with a vengeance like the freezing compartment of a hot point refrigerator. It really cools off, Dad. You can see ice in that lake. Well, walking along by the mill, for example, when I worked in the steel mill, which was built right on the lake. The steel mills are sticking out in the lake. All steel mills are sticking out into the lake because they use the lake for ore shipments, the boats that come down from the Mesabi Iron Range and from way up north to bring in the coal and all so forth, and of course ship out the stuff too after they make it. It is necessary to have water for a steel mill. Well, in January and February, the ice flows on Lake Michigan extend as far as your eye can see. They go maybe 8 or 9 miles. There's a big ice breakup. The lake is totally frozen over during the winter. Not frozen over, but it is impassable for shipping. Are you aware of that? That they have the big spring breakup? Well, I have seen ice flows in Lake Michigan in April. Ice flows that were like 9 stories high and about 17 miles across. Well, that means you've got a pretty brisk April, when the wind is blowing off an ice flow that extends all the way up to Sault Ste. Marie and blows it right down your ear, right into the windows in the bedroom. You've got a pretty cold April, I'll tell you. And of course, likewise, in the middle of January and February, it's fantastic. Well, I'll tell you one night. I remember this night because it was so vivid. The really big nights make it with a kid. And I was, I can tell you exactly. I was in 6th grade. And it's about 4 o'clock, about the time the kids come home, and it's already pretty dark and the lights are on. So I go to the store. My mother says, go to the store. Well, I start out to go to the store, which was about 1.5 blocks away. Now, remember, there was already snow, which had been on there, on the ground, off and on for maybe 1.5 months. Just snow and rubble and ice and stuff. And so I'm running along, and I'm sliding in the snow and everything. And about halfway to Mattingly's store, I feel this... It just starts out like that. There's a big puff of absolutely blood-chilling, ice-cold wind. It's like opening up an enormous deep freeze with a fan attached. Just one puff. Well, I took off from Mattingly's store knowing exactly what is about to occur. It has come from the direction of the lake, which was about 1.5 miles away. I get in Mattingly's store, and I'm buying whatever the stuff is that says on the note. And they're loading it up, the hamburger and the salami, and I'm getting the sauerkraut and the red cabbage and stuff, and the oleo and everything, and I'm buying all the big stuff we're going to have. And I'm loading it up, and I got my bag, and I walk out of Mattingly's store, and it is now about 10 or 15 degrees colder than when I started out, and it is roughly about 50% darker. It gets dark almost instantly when the big cold comes down from the north woods. You see, the north woods we can practically see from the front porch. Most people who live in New York have never seen the northern lights. Well, the northern lights are a very common sight in backyards in the Midwest. And already it's starting to come, along with the wind, these tiny pellets of this hard Arctic snow. Now, the snow that I'm referring to is a different kind of snow than the kind of snow we get, these big, soft flakes that come flying down. These are like tiny ice BBs. They're little BBs. They're like sand. It's very fine and very hard and gritty. And it blows your face and burns your face and scours you like you're being scoured by some kind of fantastic frozen sandpaper. Well, I'm trudging home now against the wind. And the wind is picking up. The temperature is dropping maybe 1 degree or 2 every 5 minutes. It really does drop about every 5 minutes, 1 degree or 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. It goes down so fast. Well, I'm about halfway home. My nose is running. My eyes are watering. My mitten is lost. My mitten is gone. You know, you get a frozen mitten and it's gone, and I'm crying and yelling and hollering, and the wind is howling, and I see about 9 other kids all around. You know, Watts is struggling against the wind, and there's all the kids are coming home from the store, which was the big scene. You know, they go to the store, and you can see kids dotting the horizon. They're like lost camels in a fantastic desert. And the wind in the house looks like it's 1,000,000 miles away. You can see a light, you know. Hey, whoo, and you're struggling, and the cars are going past, and every car that goes past, when it's really getting cold, you can tell, it leaves a trail of exhaust about maybe 30 or 40 feet behind it of condensation. That's really getting cold now. And I knew it was cold. Already now, it must have been about 0. In the half hour that I'd been on the way to the store, it is now down to maybe 0. And going down like a rock, plummeting. You know, wind is picking up, and the wind is howling maybe 45, 50 miles an hour. Not in gusts, but in a steady icicle stream. It's like it's made of 1,000,000 ice picks. Oh, woe is me. And the wires, we have these big wires above us, you know, the telephone wires are screaming. You see, all the wires here in New York are pretty well hidden, you know. Well, in towns in the Midwest, the wires are above ground, you know. They have these telephone poles, and you can hear those wires screaming like the rigging of a clipper ship. Believe me, heading into the Cameroons, the wires are whistling, and I finally get up on the front porch, and it is just insane. The house is already... immediately what happens is all the storm windows freeze up completely. You can't even see in the house. And those storm windows freeze up so hard and so fast that even the light does not show through the ice. The ice is just a thick white coat of a kind of snow. It's like the kind of stuff that you got inside the freezing compartment of your refrigerator. And then bang up! Oh, cold! As open goes the door, and I topple into the living room, a solid block of ice, my galoshes clanking and my ears falling off, yelling and hollering, and the oleo is frozen solid. And believe me, the meat is, I have a hamburger, and the meat is frozen. Have you ever carried home frozen hamburger, you know? It started out dripping in red, and it's frozen. Well, I get in the house, and I'm yelling, ah! And my mother immediately takes off my sheepskin, which clanks and bangs, and I was wearing my helmet, you know, the leatherette helmet with the sheepskin inside. Well, it's the first time I have ever seen my goggles. You know, I had these goggles, these celluloid goggles on the top. Well, the celluloid goggles were frozen over like windshields of cars. And there, I mean, you know, she drags me in, and there I'm standing there. I don't know, I must have had about 9 times, really, I must have, now that I think back on it, because I hurt for about a week after it, I must have had at least 5 different places that were badly frostbitten. But in those days, you were just cold. They didn't immediately call the pediatrician or anything like that. They just rushed you into the john and poured hot water on you, or stood you by the radiator. That's all. You know, I stand by the radiator while I'm dripping. You know, I'm beginning to melt. So I'm standing by the radiator, and boy, it is howling out there. The wind is booming in, and just about that time, the old man arrives home, screaming, yelling mad with the Graham Page. He has been caught with half a load of Zerone, and it caught him in mid-flight, and the Graham Page arrives like a gigantic 8-wheel locomotive. There was more steam coming out of that clunker, believe me, that you got out of a roundhouse on a big Saturday night. Shoo! The water is screaming, and the old man is hollering, quick, get the hot water! Oh, for God's sakes, hurry up! They're going to crack the block! And he's yelling, and in and out of the house he's running, and you could hear the Graham is out there. He's keeping the motor running, but it's in mortal agony. You know, it's a death throes, and the water is screaming, and the old man is running back and forth, and he tears out of the back of the house, and he's bound for Anderson's filling station to get some Zerone, you know. Yelling and hollering, and he falls down the steps on the ice and into a snowdrift, and he's gone. And the old Graham Page is out there, and the wind is howling, and I'm standing by the radiator yelling and screaming because my ears hurt. And my kid brother is hiding under the he's hiding under the kitchen table watching and whimpering. Well, finally, it was wild. The snow started to come down. It then started to snow hell-bent for election. Excuse the expression, but it started to come in. The world was a solid white out there. It was absolutely solid white. You could just see it slanting, and the wind, you know, carries it horizontally to the ground. And it's going in. We can hear the old Graham out. It's hitting on about 3 now. It's pumping the water out through its guts, through the back end, and it's you couldn't see anything, and my mother keeps running back and forth, pouring hot water into it, trying to save it. And she's got on her sheepskin and yelling, hurry up, close the door when I go out, hurry up! Ah! Boom, and the door closes. She's carrying out a jug of water. Well, through the snow and the storm, you could see the old man approaching with 5 cans of Zerone. He's going to save the car. I mean, that's the first thing that these nuts out there think of, you know. So he comes plodding in through the driveway and up there, and he's pouring the Zerone. Well, the car was already pretty sick, you know. He's pouring the Zerone. Every time he poured the Zerone, it would spit it out. He's pouring it. He's all right, for crying out, give me a blanket, quick, a blanket. He's putting blankets on. I don't know why they put blankets on cars, but that was a big thing, to put a blanket. So the old man is running and ripping the blankets off the bed. You know, here we are, the people, the devil with the people. You know, he's going to save the Graham. So he's running out, putting blankets and comforters and everything on the hood. Well, in the meantime, the snow is starting to come down. It is really coming down. Well, my father realized immediately what was about to happen. He puts the car in gear. He didn't care whether she was knocking, roaring, steaming, and drives it right straight into the garage. He just drives it in there. The steam is hissing out, and he turns it off, piles up the blankets on it, runs for the house, and the wind is really coming down. And before he goes, he slams the door as hard as he could on the garage, gets up into the house, and we sit in the kitchen. All of us are sitting. The old man is purple with rage. If there's anything that makes a Midwesterner mad, it's when his car freezes up. You see, because they all, like everybody else, push their luck. Ever since Thanksgiving, he figured he would go in and, well, all right, see. And all he had was a few drops left from last year. And the way the Graham used everything. This Graham Page used gaskets the way most cars use oil. He was putting a gasket in every third day, you know. It's just a kind of car like that. It burnt everything. So he's sitting there, and of course, nobody can get madder than a guy who's mad at himself for lousing up. And he is really mad. He's sitting at the kitchen table madder than the devil, and every once in a while he gets up and he takes a penny, and this is a Midwestern trick. You take a penny, an ordinary penny, and you hold it on the window, the frozen window, and the penny will melt a tiny round spot. It'll make a clear peephole in a frozen-up window so you can look out. So he's got these 2 penny holes for his eyes, and he's looking out at the garage. He says, "That damn thing!" And he's looking out. Whoo, the wind is drifting it up. And by now, it's been maybe a half an hour. My mother is serving the hamburgers. The garage is already drifted up to the eaves. It is that quick. This stuff is coming down in screaming, maniacal bushel basketfuls from up in the North Woods somewhere, and it is bringing large chunks of the lake in with it. And it is now up to the eaves in these great... Well, the garage looked like a pyramid. It just went up like that, no sides, you know, just drifted up. And it continues and continues, and the wind is screaming and howling now, and the snow is coming down, and we are now looking out of the front window. I'm going to describe a sight that is emblazoned in my mind. When you talk about great winter nights, about a block and a half from our house, there were streetcar wires. You know, the streetcars went past there. They had an interurban electric... The North Shore, as a matter of fact, is what it was. In the South Shore, they had these big interurban trains that still run in Chicago. And they're electric trains. Well, about a block from our house, these wires were becoming covered with this fantastic coating of frozen ice and snow. Have you ever seen pictures of ship rigging? When a ship has come in from the North Sea? Well, these wires were covered, and they were breaking. And every time one would break, there would be a tremendous explosion. It would just light up the whole sky like an enormous fireworks display. It would go, and this great arc. And the wire, of course, would fall down in the snow and would just explode when it hits the snow, because this is very, very high amperage voltage that is laying around there. And, of course, everything is stopped now. And these wires keep breaking, and about a half a mile from our home, across the big prairie, was a series of high-tension wires that carried 30,000 volts over to the refineries. Well, now, these are the big towers, you know, the great big steel towers. You see them over in Jersey over there. Well, these towers, Dad, started to go down. They were going down in the combined rush of wind, ice, and snow that had hit. It was now about 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Nobody's asleep. The wind is piling up that snow. And looking out of the front window of our house, we had a terrace. And we had a big front porch, and the steps went down. There were about 7 or 8 steps down to the lawn. And then the lawn went down, and then there was another 6 or 7 steps down to the street level. It was one of those terrace things. Now our porch is just level with the street. That is covered, Dad, all the way to Stryker's house across on the other side. Stryker's house was right up to the windows on the first floor by now. And it is in great peak drifts, just reaching straight up and down like an enormous white sea. And that wind is screaming, and it's laying horizontally. The snow is coming in great rolling gusts. Have you ever seen tumbleweeds? Well, one of the surprising sights in a real snowstorm is what they call rolling snow. Rolling snow is, I suppose, the equivalent of rolling snow is spume in the ocean. Spume. Have you ever seen the wind whip up the water so much that the water looks like it's smoke? It goes, it rolls over the ocean. Well, you see great rolling waves of snow, just literally rolling, just. And it's not really drift snow. This is the way the snow, it's like snow that is coming down at an angle and then hitting the ground and then bouncing up and going on and on until it gathers a kind of puff of smoke. It's like waves of snow rolling along over the ground. Oh, boy, it's an insane sight when you get a 50 and a 60 mile an hour wind howling along. Well, at about that time, I would say it was about 9 o'clock. And the big towers, we saw 2 big towers go down with a fantastic roar, gigantic explosion. And someplace, they cut the electricity. They had to cut it all. And all the lights went out in the entire town, just like that. Boom. Dead silence. Except for that wind. And immediately, you know that in the Midwest, everybody has a drawer down in the cupboards in the kitchen. A drawer that's got all that stuff. And among all the stuff, among the string, they always have about 9 emergency candles for exactly this, these white candles that they buy. So immediately, my mother is running for the candles. The wind is screaming over that wild ground, just screaming. And it is pitch black. You cannot see a light now, of course, for miles around. And then gradually you begin to see the candle, just a little tiny candle. And you see people peeking out of these tiny penny holes, once in a while. And you see then, and this is probably the most spectacular sight, you see where guys have abandoned cars. And as far as you can see along the roads, and this is not a wild country town. As far as you can see along the streets and the roads, you just see these little tiny hills that are barely discernible, just a little bump, and you know it is a car that somebody has abandoned. If he was lucky, there were at least a half dozen people caught in cars, by the way, who had to be rescued maybe 2 days later, actually stuck could not get out. They couldn't open the doors or anything. It was frozen. Their cars were frozen stiff. They said, we'll pull over to the side of the road, and by the time they pulled over to the side of the road and rested for 10 minutes, the car was covered up. That's the kind of snowstorm it was. Well, by now, the ground is just like, it's level, and you can just see the roofs of houses as far as you can see, and it is now covering our porch and is right up to the windows and drifting down sort of great rolling drips. Our driveway, which was between our house and Bruner's house, which had been like a chasm, an actual chasm, between the two houses, and it was down below the level of the lawn. It was one of those down with the little concrete abutments, It was disappeared completely. The snow in the driveway must have been 10 feet deep, at least, in the driveway, because that was like shoot, it caught it all. Well, we're sitting there, and the wind is screaming in. And by that time, we're getting ready to, kids are starting to cork off and once in a while you'd hear the dull thud of a telephone pole going down out there. Yeah, everything went off. As a matter of fact, the radio completely conked out. There were 4 or 5 antennae blown down. The big antenna, WGN, a couple of others, just absolutely, that was it. They just went off the air. They were blown off the air. They lost their current, everything. It was a fantastic blizzard. Well, by about 10 or 11 o'clock, the temperature stood at roughly 25 below zero. It had dropped from about 25 or 30 degrees at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon until now. Just a few hours later, it had dropped about 50 degrees. That is a drop. And with that wind and with that strange buckshot snow, you really had yourself a gas. Well, of course, we're trying to go to bed. Well, by that time, there is a new complication. I don't know whether you've ever lived in a house where all the pipes are frozen. Well, that complicates a lot of things. We don't even have to go into that. Everything was frozen in the house. And then the final kicker, the final irony, the wind was coming in and icing up so much that in some nutty way it was icing up everybody's chimneys. We had chimneys, sticking up, and it was icing it up. It was doing something, and blowing, the wind was coming down into the furnaces. And so the old man suddenly gets panicky at about 10 o'clock because coming out of the hot air registers is great yellow puffs of coke smoke. Oh, he's running down in the basement. Hey, it's done. Hey, boom, boom, boom. He's hollering. He can't figure it out. His first reaction when the furnace did anything was to grab the big handle on the side and shake it and start hitting it with the poker. That was his first reaction. Well, the more he shook it, the more the smoke is coming out. And we're up in the front room, and the smoke is coming out and puffing around. You can't open the windows. And the old man said, what am I going? Hey, for crying, what? Will you work the damper? It's the damper. Get the damper. Well, we had a thing called the damper. which was behind the kitchen door. It was a kind of a thing, you'd move it. It's a damper on it or something. You ever hear of such a thing? Well, we're working the damper. He figured it was the damper then. So my mother's up there working the damper, and with that, a giant puff of smoke comes out of the chimney and out of the furnace and out of all hot air registers, and it's even worse. And the old man says, "Will you quit fooling with the damper? For crying out loud!" Boom, boom. And the furnace goes bloop, makes a big belch, bloop, and it kind of blows up. Have you ever seen a furnace blow up? It went bloop. And the old man is screaming and yelling down in the basement, and the only thing he can figure to do is to put out the fire, which is what he proceeded to do. He got about 4 buckets of water out of the basement clothes. We had these big closed things down there. He gets about 4. Push! That's it. He says, "I figure it's better to have the fire out and freeze than to get gassed." And there it is. The fire is out. Yellow smoke is hanging in the draperies. It's hanging in the bedroom in the John. And next door you can hear Mrs. Bruner yelling at Mr. Bruner. The same thing has happened. You can hear him yelling and hollering. And Mrs. Bruner then breaks a window and yells over to our house and hollers, "Is your house warm? Can we come over?" Their house is cold. Everybody's house is cold. It's about 30 below zero now. Well, all I can tell you is this. No electricity. The pipes are frozen. The furnace has conked out. You never saw more stuff piled on beds to try to keep warm. Everybody is huddled in the front bedroom with every coat, every piece of junk out of the closets. Guys are wearing tennis shoes on their ears. The whole thing. Everybody is sitting there, and they take the bedclothes off. They got everything piled up. It's like that. Everybody's piled under a great big pile of stuff. It's like moles, and the wind is screaming and hollering out there all night long. And all I remember as a kid, finally falling asleep under 17, maybe 18 pounds of daybed stuff, with big cretonne curtains, and everything was piled up. The rug was on top of us. And finally, my mother had a great gambit. She would take all the papers, our newspapers, and put them inside. You put them inside of your pajamas. You ever seen that trick? She would line us with newspapers. So, yeah, sure, it works great. So lined up with newspapers, you put your bathrobe on, you put your football suit on, you put your baseball suit on, you put your pongee long johns on, you put your helmet on, you put everything on, you put your sheepskin on, you put the whole scene. I had everything on, and then finally I'm asleep there in the comforters. That's all I remember. Well, the next morning, there it is. The wind has stopped, and the sun is out as brilliantly as it's ever shone. In fact, this is what generally happens out there after a blizzard. That sun comes out. Well, of course, immediately the kids are out looking out at the world, you see, and it's about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I do not know how to describe to you the feeling of an Indiana house at 5 o'clock in the morning after the furnace has been out for 8 or 9 or 10 hours, and the wind has been blowing down the eaves. The wind has been blowing in every possible crack and crevice. Even the mice were huddled around us, just hanging on to us for protection. It is so fantastic. And immediately, the only thing that worked was the gas oven. And so my mother is out there with the gas oven going, and the entire family is standing around the oven, and we're just standing there with the heat going like mad. And what do you think we're doing? Well, I'll tell you what we're doing. There was not even the slightest thought of not going to school. No. You go to school, that's it. And here I was about, a kid of, 10? I was about 3 feet 7. And my kid brother was about 2 feet 6. And so... So we put on our long black stockings, about 4 pairs of them. We put on 2 pairs of long johns. I put on 4 sweaters, 3 pairs of corduroy pants, including the one that had the twigs growing out of it. I put on my woolen socks that I used in gym. I put on my tennis shoes. I put on over them my galoshes, and over them I put on another pair of woolen socks. I put on my earmuffs, my leather helmet. I put on my sheepskin coat. I must have weighed at least 250 pounds. And for a 56-pound kid, that's a lot, And so at that point, I am propelled. I go out the front door, followed by my kid brother. Well, all I can say is that I burrowed